internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winford Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Tonight, breaking. Staff at the University of the West Indies, Mona, are now threatening to disrupt examinations. They walked out to the campus gates today for the second time this week. A compensation review has been completed. The Ministry of Finance has had it for months, and it has not moved. There was a meeting today after the protest. Tonight, 3 staff members join us, 2 on the record, 1 under anonymity. What happens next and who pays the price? Then Hurricane Melissa destroyed or nearly damaged 200,000 homes. The government's roofs program was built to respond. Tonight, the opposition says it is hopelessly inadequate. The MP for South St. James join us. And then the children's advocate and Jamaicans for Justice on 2 urgent questions. Who is protecting children from sexual harm? And is the child diversion system quietly criminalizing the very children it was meant to save? I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story. This is breaking tonight. Staff at the University of the West Indies Mona campus have threatened to disrupt examinations. They returned to the gates of the campus today, the second time this week, and the language has hardened. This is no longer only about salaries. This is now about whether students who've done nothing wrong will be able to sit and receive the results of their examinations. Now, this is a pattern that history tells us to watch. In January 2022, WIGOT, the West Indies group of university teachers, withheld mark sheets for Semester 1 examinations. In 2023, staff at the St. Augustine campus refused to submit exam papers with the final weeks away. And University of the West Indies here at Mona in January of 2024 had the threat of full industrial action withdrawn only after an emergency meeting with the Ministers of Finance and Education produced an interim salary adjustment agreement. That 15% interim increase was signed in April 2024. It was accepted by the unions as a first step, not a final answer. Today, that journey has stalled again. A compensation review was commissioned, completed, and shared with the unions. But now we have people back at the gates again. Joining us tonight are 3 members of UWI Mona staff. Jermaine Austin with us on the record, Gary Samuels also with us on the record, and we also have a staff member who has asked that we protect their identity. Tonight, we're calling her Miss Staff Member. Miss Staff Member is here with us now, and we'll start with her first. Miss Staff Member, were you today outside for the second time this week at the protest that currently took place?
Yes, I was.
Why were you there? Because this is not the first time this week, it's the second time this week. Why did you think it was important to continue to have your concerns raised?
One of the main problems we're having with the university is communication. We haven't been able to see a salary scale and where each job would fall. We keep hearing about the government. We haven't get any concrete information showing what the government said or what the government intend to contribute to the salaries. We want to know when we will be able to get our new salary. Those are some of the main issues.
Those are such serious issues. We have on screen right now people with placards and signs asking for their money to be paid over to them as a result of concerns that you have said. But today marked an escalation with now a threat that is being made that the students might also be impacted and affected. Talk to us about why that was added today.
Well, today being the second day of the protest within our lunchtime, that's what we're going to call it right now. And to date, we haven't get any communication, not from our union, not from the university. So we feel like we need to take it a step further.
We had inside CVM a conversation earlier this week with the university campus registrar, Dr. Donovan Stanbury, on this issue. He has said that the institution is waiting on the Ministry of Finance before the next step can be taken. Let's see if we can play a clip of that as he spoke with our managing editor, Giovanni Dennis, on what it is that he had been listening to on Monday when this first staff protest had taken place, and what he was still awaiting in order to then give more information to staff, indicating that on Monday he had been surprised that staff had made their way out in front of the campus for the first time. Let's take a listen to him.
We were not engaged in terms of any action today. I wrote to the union heads independent of the action. In fact, I wrote them before I understood that they were out there, to give them a further written update as to where we are.
Which is where? Which is where?
Which is where we are.
Where are you going?
The ministry is completing their review, and we'll soon get a recommendation from the ministry. As soon as we get that, we'll sit with them and finalize the negotiations.
So we're waiting then for the ministry. Miss Staff Member, the ministry has given no timeline. From your perspective then, is this a university problem, a government failure, or both?
At this point, I would say it's both, because to be honest, I don't believe that the government is holding up this process. I just feel like the university is stalling and they're trying to buy time, so they're using the government.
Before we go to Gary Samuels, another staff member who is on with us, you are speaking to us under condition of anonymity. Why don't you feel comfortable, or didn't you feel comfortable talking publicly under your own name about a topic like this?
Well, it is possible that people will get victimized for this protest, so I am trying to protect myself.
Important for us to note that. Jermaine Samuels, you're here with us as well. You were there today at the protest. This is the second for this week. Were you there at the first one, and why were you there today? Gary?
Yeah. Gary is speaking.
Hi, Gary. Thanks so much. That's Gary Samuels joining us on record. Talk to us. There was a protest today, a protest after one on Monday. Did you join both protests?
No, I'm unable to join the first protest.
Okay.
I was there and I returned. When I returned, I cried of my constituents that enough is enough and they need some answers. And as such, I decided, said, I'm going to lead the charge, because I can't believe that my members are out there crying and we have no other representative to stand with them. So I decided to go out and let the cry be a joint.
Gary, you're talking about being a joint cry. Who do you represent in this situation?
I represent the Monash youth. In this situation, I represent all the workers, both UW, because they were there also, and Monash were there also. So I represent
UW and Monash?
Yes.
Okay, so there's two unions who are also protesting today?
Both unions were out there protesting.
Okay. We got one union, the West Indies, let me be very forensic, it's a long acronym there. It is the West Indies Now I can't find it. But we got another union that's there had accepted an increase of 15% interim increase in 2024. They said that was our first step, and there are clearly many more rivers to cross. In 2026, where are we right now?
No, okay. So in 2026, at this moment, we are now at a crossroad trying to figure out what's the next move, because there is clearly a miscommunication gap between the union, university management, and also one with the government. So we need to know what is going on. Is it a situation that the compensation review is going somewhere, or it's not going somewhere? And if yes, why has it not been moved as fast as it could? Because we have been invested for the past 4 years. We were asked to hold strain. We tried. And nonetheless, when we realize what's going on, we now ask that the management now come and have a talk with us. Let us know what's going on, because since there's a full gap between communication with management and also with the union, and we as the members and delegates not hearing what's going on, we have to take it to the streets so our voice may be heard, because we are waiting for 4 years to see what's happening.
All right, that's Gary. They're talking to us. Jermaine Austin, are you on with us as well?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Jermaine, we also understand that there was a meeting after today's protest. People now finally getting some movement, some leverage after not the first but the second walkout by university staff. Are you aware of that meeting today?
Yeah, I was aware of it from a couple staff members, but I wasn't there in the meeting.
What were they able to share with you about that meeting?
Nothing, basically. Like, everybody is trying, they're just hiding. I don't know why. You see, the fear that they put in us, they just hide. But they don't want to say no, be the first to say no.
If you don't get anything then from today's meeting, for all of you, what's the next step? First for you, Jermaine.
Well, I hope we'll get together, and we're planning up to lock the gate on Friday or Monday.
Gary Samuels?
We need to answer.
What's the next step if you don't hear anything?
Okay, so I can sincerely tell you that when I stood in the meeting, a couple of my colleagues since afternoon here, we has come to a consensus that I will take back to my members. We're going to meet tomorrow morning at the Estate Management Department at 7:30 and educate them that this is a situation that management said they have gotten some leverage or some headway with the government, and as such, they want us to give them a reasonable time to complete what they are on now.
So you're giving them additional time then to see what's going on. Jermaine Austin says perhaps an escalation. Ms. Staff Member, finally to you as we close. What's the next step for you now that you have heard the university's position, especially since Gary just said more time is being asked for?
They've had 4 years. I don't think we can give them any more time.
Exactly, no more time.
All right, so Jermaine Austin, Gary Samuels, and a third staff member who, under condition of anonymity, is speaking to us as Miss Staff Member. Thank you so much for joining us tonight inside Lead Story. The students sitting exams at Mona are watching tonight, and so we hope is the Ministry of Finance. When we come back, Hurricane Melissa left nearly 2,000 homes damaged or destroyed. Tonight, the opposition says the government's response has been, they call, hopelessly inadequate. We'll talk about that next inside Lead Story.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The time by the Office of the Prime Minister is...
Every dream conquered is another dream gained. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction, 'cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music keeps on playing, and the people them I say we are march up the dance. Oh, what a feeling! Don't stop dreaming. Keep on believing in the power of the feeling. Whatever you want, take a chance. Song in your heart, step in your dance. You got the spark, don't be the dark. Shine your lights
Hi, I am Kendi Pang.
Watagwan.
Watagwan.
Datagwan.
Watagwan.
Watagwan. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
Datagwan pa Watagwan.
Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica on the 28th of October, 2025. What it left behind is staggering. The Planning Institute of Jamaica has confirmed total damage and losses at US $12.2 billion. That was an increase from the 41% we heard before. Now it's 56.7% of the country's gross domestic product for 2024. But with all that, the government has put together a program. The government's primary response is the ROOS program, the restoration of owner or occupant family shelters. It was allocated 10 billion Jamaican dollars. Grants are tiered. $75,000 for minor damage, up to $500,000 for severe verified damage. The Ministry of Labour and Social Security says 110,000 household assessments have been completed. But yesterday, in a press conference, opposition leader Mark Golding described the ROOS program, in his words, as hopelessly inadequate and incompetently administered. He argued that the $10 billion allocation represents less than 1/3 of a percent of GDP, and less than 10% of the resources Jamaica could have drawn on under its disaster risk financing framework. So today we are speaking with an opposition member of parliament for South St. James, one of the parishes most badly affected by Hurricane Melissa, to talk to us about what her constituents are experiencing, because she and the opposition yesterday have said that there are two very different accounts of the very same program. Ms. Burchell, Keisha Burchell, thank you so much for joining us inside Lead Story.
Hi, Jody. Thank you for having me, and good evening to your listeners and viewers.
We're having a big discussion today because opposition leader Mark Golding said yesterday the government has dropped the ball. You represent one of the hardest hit constituencies in the country. What are your constituents telling you on the ground about what the ROOS program has and has not delivered?
They've asked me to let Jamaica know that what you're hearing in the news, what you're seeing on paper is not what is translating in their lives and in their communities at home. There's a huge gap, Jody, between what was promised and what people are actually experiencing. So this roofs program, it launched with much fanfare, and we had great expectations and great hopes for it because God knows our people need the housing assistance. So we're finding three different things occurring for us. There are those who have not yet been assessed because they're not home when those persons from the Ministry of Labour would come to the community to collect their data. Or even if they come to the community at all, we're not sure. There are also those who are in the system but have not yet received a call or a text message to indicate if they have qualified. And then there's a third set. There are those who have received a text or a partial text, and when they turn up to get assistance, they're told there is no money there for them, or they stand in the sun all day and leave empty-handed nonetheless. And yesterday I cited the example of Mr. Joshua Walker. He's just one because he's a very glaring example. He's that person who I was asked to bring 3 representatives from the constituency who qualified based on the government's assessment for $500,000 grant towards the rebuilding of their home. I asked Mr. Walker, we call him Man Wall, to come and collect the symbolic check indicating that he would be getting $500,000. To this date, Manawal has not received either text message, neither has he received any indication of whether or not he's been approved truly, and if that was just a photo op. He went to the NIS office as recently as this Monday, and was sent back with no assistance. So it's not as if we don't want the system to work. We need it to work. We want it to work properly. We're finding as well that there are homes where multi-residents are qualifying and have collected checks when we have homes that have been totally disseminated and not even $1. All we're asking is that the system be assessed or reassessed with a view to finding out where the gaps are, because at the end of the day, what we want is to deliver quality service, timely service to the people, but fair service as well.
Fair service, timely service, but in the context of a program that had to emergency be put together after the joint record holder for the most powerful Atlantic hurricane in history. That's Hurricane Melissa that hit Jamaica. It's something that we've never seen before. And the Minister of Labour and Social Security, who is administering the program, joined us inside Lead Story, talking about the assessment process, speaking about how rigorous it would need to be. And now we're at about 110,000 assessments completed. If the assessment machinery is working, it's taking place. Most people, there's quite a large number of people who are getting assessed. Where specifically is it that the opposition is saying the breakdown is occurring that either prevents that first group you said who are not there to be assessed, or that second group that is still waiting for some response as to how the assessment now will be resolved?
What we're saying is that a significant amount of the budget for Hurricane Melissa relief is going towards public relations as opposed to public communication. So instead of putting on these dazzling events to launch an event or to hand out symbolic checks, put that money instead towards building out those communication channels that get the information to the people. So when it is campaign and election time, we have advertisements on radio. Also have print material all over the communities. We have town criers. This is how we get information to people who do not have internet and reliable telephone connection because of Hurricane Melissa. Simple, really. Want the people coming to find a way to get the information to them so that they can get it where they are. Or imagine someone whose home has been totally destroyed, expected to stay at home in the rubble and wait for whenever someone may or may not turn up in their community. I was in the Stonehenge community, Jody, on Monday, where we hand over a home, courtesy of Andre Stevens and his supporters, to a blind 80-year-old woman, Miss Cooper. And what I found just standing in the square, we have Bongo, who is a Rasta man. He's also in his early 80s, living right in the square. Right now, Bongo is living under a tarpaulin. And I'm not saying that he has tarpaulin on the top of his house. He has no house. He has used the tarpaulin to fashion a home for himself.
Had he had previously had a home and is now waiting for the roof's disbursement?
Previously had a home. He isn't even sure if he's waiting for the roof's disbursement because he said no one has visited his home. He's in the square of Stonehenge. So if the person at the square has not yet been assessed, yet we are trumpeting that our assessment work is complete, then we have a significant gap. Right across the road, that's Miss Cooper's home. She has not received any assistance. Right at the train station, we have another lady living right there at the train station who had a business as well as a home. If you look, you see her settee, you see her table, you see her stove, you see everything has been left there just open to the elements. That is the square of a very prominent community in my constituency. We're not complaining.
With that then, this example that you give, the example of Manor Wall that you gave earlier as well, individuals, we have in the Gleaner today a report of Angela Allen, a woman who had her home destroyed, thought she's getting $500,000, only received $200,000. All of those things now, these stories that are coming out now, even as this program is dealing with a lot of things that we've never seen before. The opposition has said that there's still gaps. Help us out. What would an adequate program look like, especially with the 3 areas that you have highlighted are gap areas? And is this something that you're willing to bring before Parliament to assist in building out or fixing this issue that you've highlighted?
Jody, the opposition has been consistent from day one. We're willing, we're able to assist the government with getting the information they need to address the issues our constituents have. What we're thinking is that there has been a concerted effort to remove the political representatives from the program. The political representatives have long built out channels of communication in the communities. This is how we get to our voters on election day. This is the same channel that is a grassroots channel that can get information to the ministry to say this person, not that person, based on the fact that they've received before. Why not use a system that actually worked in the past, has been working? Why reinvent the wheel? When I told a past teacher, Mrs. Cunningham, again from the Stonehenge community, that they're creating a new system through this WePay app, she's like, WePay what? These are senior citizens who do not understand how to use technology in the way you and I use it, Jody. Why not send it to her bank account as they've done in the past for COVID relief and stuff of that nature? We're reinventing the wheel. We're excluding partners and key stakeholders in the community. The end result is this. Those who deserve the help are left because they are missed between the between the cup and the lip.
It's certainly something that having now these stories, looking at this program, seeing how it can be supported is certainly something that we want to see more of. And we thank you for joining us inside Lead Story. Nikisha Burchell talking to us about the concerns that you as Member of Parliament have and that have been highlighted by the opposition.
Thank you, Jody.
All right, after the break, the Children's Advocate and Jamaicans for Justice join us on child protection.
The style is no scam and I style me.
From the market to the farm to the office, money talk is everywhere. But are you making sense or nonsense? The Bank of Jamaica brings you common sense with BOJ, real stories, real laughs, and real lessons to help you protect, grow, and manage your money. Mattress savings.
At least my mattress. You charge me to sleep on it.
Partner plan.
Remember last year we needed our payouts early? But Miss Pam gave it to her cousin first.
Or a sketchy loan flyer.
Electrifying deals.
See why making the right financial choices is pure common sense. Brought to you by Bank of Jamaica, empowering everyday Jamaicans one episode at a time.
Grandpa, it's 2026. You can't keep hiding all your money in every single pocket forever.
Jamaica. Make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a Guan! Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
And that's a guan pa. What a guan?
Now we're discussing sexual violence against children. And Jamaica's first nationally representative survey of violence against children and young people, the VAX 2023, conducted by the Planning Institute of Jamaica with support from UNICEF and the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, found that more than 3 in 4 children and young people between the ages of 13 and 24 have, in Jamaica, experienced some form of violence in their lifetime. Nearly 1 in 4 girls, 23.7%, and more than 1 in 10 boys, 11.7%, experience sexual violence specifically in childhood. Those numbers are not background statistics, though. They're the baseline against which every institutional claim about child protection in this country has to be measured. Because against that backdrop, we are now hearing reports from the president of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Dr. Mark Malava, making a public statement on April 7 at the JTA Education Conference, raising allegations that students at some schools are being used as hurricane shelters, were being exposed to sexual acts by persons sheltering on the premises. So with allegations like those, we have to know then how it is that we are reporting sexual violence, what it is that we know about sexual violence and violence against our children, and how it is that we are protecting our children. Joining us inside Lead Story this evening are two of the most consequential voices on child rights in Jamaica. Diane Gordon-Harrison, children's advocate, and Mikel Jackson, executive director of Jamaicans for Justice. Welcome to you both.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Diane Gordon-Harrison, you are the children's advocate. Before we get to the specifics of who said what about anything, that VAX data that I shared a moment ago tells us that childhood sexual violence in Jamaica is not exceptional. It's unfortunately widespread and systemic. Does Jamaica's current institutional framework for child protection match the scale of what the data describes?
All right, so just to agree with you, Jodian, the data has been consistent, unfortunately, and third only to children in need of care and protection and those who are neglected. Children who are alleged to be victims of sexual violence at different scales continue to occupy spot number 3, if you will, in terms of the reports. You ask a very critical question. My own view is that we are over-legislated. We do have a very comprehensive legislative framework, I would say, that really factors in different entry points that services can be provided and intervention to children who really have a need for that kind of support. Where I think we need to boost up our efforts, though, is galvanizing communities who are really the eyes and ears of the framework and the system, because as you know, the framework can only work if you have persons who are really participating in the act of protection. So that means making reports in a timely way, disclosing even acts of suspicion because under our Child Care and Protection Act, it does say that's the route that we need to go if we're going to increase the vigilance for our children. But
so it's not just an actual act that you know that has taken place. It's even if you suspect, which changes it from the standard and burden of proof to now saying protection of the child is so paramount that even if you think something may have gone wrong, say something.
Absolutely. So Section 6 of our Child Care and Protection Act really says that we are going to be erring on the side of caution when it comes down to our children. So persons do not have the need to seek any evidence. They don't need to be little vigilantes and investigators out in the field trying to pull together anything. It actually says if you have a mere suspicion that something is even about to happen, it hasn't even happened yet, there is a mandatory obligation to report. And I think the Act goes that far because it wants to say, look, when it comes down to the vulnerability of children and the state of the affairs that always impact children and their helplessness because they're minors, and many times they're caught in situations where they can't navigate it by themselves. So the community really has to come on board to assist us in that, in those efforts. The other thing as well, not mention this, is that we can always do with more resources. You mentioned, are we ready based on the scale of the problem? I think very serious gains have been made, progress has been made, but of course there's always the need for more. Child sexual abuse and violence is a dynamic and a constantly changing phenomenon. And so that means complacency is never an option, because just when you think you're on top of the game, something else happens to change it. And because the rules keep changing and the practices keep changing, it means that we have to be innovative and really ahead of the curve if we're going to continue to be effective.
We need that effectiveness, though, Mikel Jackson. And I'm pulling you in here, having listened now to the Children's Advocate, you as Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice. Your organization, though, has been very, very vocal. Making sure no one falls between the cracks is what it is that you're trying to prevent. And you see some of that happening. When a child reports sexual harm, Mikel, in Jamaica today, what exactly happens next? Walk us through the system as it currently functions and as is reported to Jamaicans for Justice.
Well, we thanks for having me on, and I'm happy to pick up with what the Children's Advocate indicated, and I think before we even get to the walking through the system, I think we need to understand the roles and responsibility of all individuals in society, but also the heightened responsibility that is also placed on duty bearers and prescribed persons. So, for example, healthcare workers, educators, and with that comes the importance of understanding the different agencies and how they work and where to actually make a report to, based on the nature of the suspicions or whatever circumstances, whether it be that a child is being neglected that would put them in harm's way, or the possibility that a child may be experiencing some sort of sexual violence or abuse. And with that comes in mind, again, the understanding of the agencies for healthcare workers, educators in particular, to know their roles, where to report. If there is an immediate danger, we know that we ought to be calling the police. If it is that there are concerns about sexual violence, the understanding of the roles between the Child Protection and Family Services Agency versus the role of the Office of the Children's Advocate is also something I am impressing upon for the different agencies to understand that nuance. Why am I making that distinction? Outside of the reports coming to JFJ from individuals, family members, we have gotten calls from several educators, even at the primary school level. JFJ, where do I make a report to? Because I suspect that this child may be experiencing sexual violence. And we have to explain to the educators that if it is that you are even uncertain about the agencies, it's best that you call 211. That's the advice that we give them. And then they will walk you through the system. One of the other gaps I want to flag, as I wholeheartedly support the comment made by the Children's Advocate, that we have strong legislative framework in Jamaica, to the extent that the arguments that you may hear is just the need for maybe increased penalties and terms of imprisonment, just to show you that the law itself does provide that protective framework. Where I think we need to strengthen is where I started. The need for the prescribed persons and the duty bearers to understand the framework, where to make the complaints. And then secondly to that, is for the agencies to act upon those complaints when they do get them.
All right.
In a few instances that we got, just to finish this thought very quickly, in a few complaints that we got where people have made complaints to Sissoko, saying, for example, my minor was engaged in sexual activity with an older person, a big man in some instances. We have seen where there have been delays in the response from Sissoko or the families alleging that the response that they have gotten has not necessarily been treated with the level of seriousness that the particular case deserves. So enforcement and follow-up from the state authorities is something I want to flag as a major concern.
I think that is so important. I'm going to workshop a question with you both before we take a break, because in the public domain right now we have allegations, shelter allegations raised by the Jamaica Teachers Association president on April 7. They're still under investigation. No findings have been confirmed. But those questions now raise institutional flags for us, because we have to figure out now, when a school is converted into a civilian emergency shelter, who's legally responsible for the safety of children in that space? And does that responsibility currently have a clear answer in law or policy? Quick answers from you both, Diane Gordon Harrison and then Mikel Jackson.
All right, so the simple answer is whenever there's any adult in a responsible position, whether it's a school administrator or the shelter operator, those persons automatically owe and have a duty of care to children. Again, because of the vulnerability and the fact that they're in a position of authority. I just want to stick a pin though, Jodian, because my understanding of certainly the clips I've heard of the JTA president's comments is that the sexual activity did not actually engage minors. It was minors seeing.
But is that exposure to sexualized content is also something that we want to protect our children from?
Yes, I just wanted to be clear because the topic says sexual violence against children.
Yes.
And the statistics that you quoted are of a different sort. So I just wanted to make that very apparent in the response.
I think that's very useful for us as well, given the workshop example. This is not about sexual violence, but the exposure to sexualized content there. And again, engaging that child protection framework that you would have laid out for us in this conversation. Mikel Jackson, before we take a quick break and move you both to another topic, what do you think now about this exposure to sexualized content in the context of now protecting our children? Who's supposed to be responsible for our kids?
The Child Care and Protection Act, in recognizing the vulnerability of a child, places the responsibility on every single person. But there's a heightened responsibility on prescribed persons in this context of the conversation, the school administrators, and as Mrs. Gordon Harrison indicated just now, the operators of the shelter. I want to also make it very clear that I think we did the country a disservice with the conversations that were happening following the JTA president's allegations, wherein it focused on whether or not evidence need to be brought forward. And the Child Care and Protection Act, again, Section 6 makes it very clear that even the suspicion of a child being subject to whether it be the exposure of sexual activity, then that in and of itself warrants a report being made. The other conversation that I think we also need to have, when such things are flagged to the different ministries and agencies, I think we need to focus less on the who said what and what they said, and the substance of the allegations, so that an investigation itself would commence with immediacy.
And I think that's so important that you've highlighted that there as well, that protection of our children doesn't depend on that detailed information. They'll investigate afterwards. It requires anything that could even harm our children to be brought before the courts. 211 is a number that had been mentioned before. That's a toll-free hotline dedicated to reporting child abuse and neglect. And we have some other numbers that will come up on the screen here about reporting child sexual abuse. The CPFSA hotline, the Office of the Children's Advocate hotline, CISOCA, and you can always call your nearest police station. We'll take a break inside Lead Story and come back to you, because protecting our children doesn't only matter when they are victims. It might also matter when they're perpetrators. And we'll talk about that next inside Lead Story.
Change does not happen overnight. It takes vision, commitment, and courage to reform.
So we created a number of executive agencies, which I believe, and I can say, having left this thing for, was one of the most successful initiatives undertaken in the reform process.
But transformation isn't easy.
We found in several ministries, agencies, and departments, you had square pegs in round holes.
You could almost say that public sector transformation is not a JLP policy, it's not a PNP policy. It is national policy.
There was political willingness, there was bipartisan support for going through with the reforms, there was societal support, a lot of societal sacrifices. People of Jamaica made a lot of sacrifices. And businesses, the private sector, everybody was engaged in this journey.
We want to continue to reform the public sector, to allow the public sector to provide the services to the Jamaican people, provide services to the private sector. And the idea is that those services must be more accessible. Those services must be more affordable. Those services must be faster. They must be more personable and comfortable for the citizen.
Watch Building a Better Public Sector, a 4-part docuseries right here on CVM, commencing April 5 and aired every Sunday in April at 3 p.m. Brought to you by the Transformation Implementation
We're now moving on to a different conversation with two of the best people to help us with it. We're talking about the Child Diversion Act of 2018 and continuing our discussion about the protection of our children. But this time, they're alleged to be perpetrators. Now, this piece of legislation, the Child Diversion Act, was built on a simple premise that children between the ages of 12 and 17 who come into contact with the law should, where possible, be steered away from the formal criminal justice system toward counseling, mentorship, rehabilitation, rather than toward a conviction and a record that will follow them for life. Now, inside this show, we continue to be joined by Diane Gordon-Harrison, Children's Advocate, and Mikkel Jackson, Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice. And Diane Gordon-Harrison, you have now gone before Parliament and have now allowed the country to understand that we are at a place where, unfortunately, the wording of the act is trying to steer children away from getting into the formal legal system, and you're finding that courts are operating differently. Talk to us about what you found.
All right, so the practical application of the act is being interpreted in courts in two different ways. There are some of our presiding judges who are of the view that to accept responsibility, which is a prerequisite for a child to become referred to child diversion, means to enter a guilty plea. While there are other judges who form the view that if there's an indication of remorse and an acceptance that yes, something went wrong, and that is usually communicated to the child diversion officer, that is a sufficient indication of acceptance of responsibility, and they use that as a means through which to facilitate the referral to the child diversion program. Of course, the first one seems, very curious because the same Child Diversion Act says, I think in section 2 sub 3, that the act should be applied once it's appropriate and once it's possible in a way that does not have the child involved in the traditional formal criminal justice process. And of course, if you exact a guilty plea from a child, that means the child now stands convicted by his or her own admission, which seems to suggest that you have embarked upon criminal proceedings.
You have, in that respect, this is what we're trying to avoid, and you're saying that there are two different ways that judges are reading it. Justice Minister Delroy Chuck has publicly acknowledged that some judges are, and we'll call it, misinterpreting the act, if you will, given what you've indicated. If the minister himself knows that this is happening, why has this not been corrected through a practice direction from the Chief Justice without waiting for Parliament to amend the legislation or provide further clarity? If we know the children are in the middle of this now, why not immediately fix it so that we have one single path that they're going down?
Well, I think the approach may be taken that the courts are at liberty to interpret the law as they understand it. And so that's why the substantive issue and concern that, certainly I have with it, found its way in the form of a recommendation to the Joint Select Committee of Parliament that it should be made abundantly clear in the section that admission of responsibility does not mean a guilty plea. And I hope, the feeling I got certainly throughout the sitting was that recommendation seemed to have found favor. So I hope that at the conclusion of the deliberations, we'll see that amendment so that this ambiguous position can be done away with.
That Joint Select Committee of Parliament is currently reviewing the Child Diversion Act. You said you went before them. Michael Jackson, we're looking though at a situation involving the protection of children, but this time when they're seen to be the perpetrators. If a child who pleads guilty and then is not admitted to diversion, or who fails to complete the program, then exits the program with a criminal conviction, that is exactly the outcome the act was designed to prevent. From Jamaican for Justice's perspective, is that a problem of capacity, inadequate training in the courts, or a problem of policy design in the legislation itself?
Thanks for that. I think it's a combination of all that you mentioned, because we actually made our submission and went before Parliament as well some weeks ago. And I think what you find as a key challenge with the legislation, it's excellent at face value, but what it lacks are procedural steps so that some of the hiccups that we're facing could be averted. And I put that in context when you look at some other jurisdiction, whether it be a South African, a Fiji and others, what you find is that they have a Child Justice Act, my apologies, that will detail out some of these specific things, but also procedurally how these things are supposed to operate. And I soon give you a very good example. Versus Jamaica, we have our Child Care and Protection Act separate from the child diversion legislation, and then you know that you have like the Criminal Justice Administration Act and so on. So because they're so separated, what you find is sometimes the inability for us to understand really in practical terms how these things operate. For example, the purpose of the Child Diversion Act is to prevent a child from interfacing with the adversarial criminal justice system. So you want the child to be diverted as early as possible, which is why, for example, you find that the police can refer a child for diversion as well as the courts. One of the things that we flag is that the diversion is not even being considered at the first appearance that a child goes before the court, the second or the third or the fourth. So it relies on defense attorneys in a lot of the instances outside of the matters, for example, that the children's advocate would be supporting from her office. The defense attorneys need to have the awareness about the legislation to say to the courts, respectfully, Your Honor, this is a matter that I would ask for the child to be considered for diversion. In other jurisdictions, once it is a child matter and the offense is a diversionable matter, what you find is that the courts would automatically consider diversion as an option and as a pathway.
I think
and
that
this
is
is a recommendation that JFJ has made.
I think that is so important that you've highlighted how other jurisdictions do it, but also then what we might have to tighten up in our own system. Diane Gordon Harrison, before we go and close this conversation, your office has also raised a concern that is not even children in conflict with the law being brought. There's children who have behavioral difficulties that are being brought before these courts now asking for child diversion. What does that tell us about our children who are at risk but not yet in conflict with the law?
So 2 clarifications in relation to this. So just to piggyback on what Mikhail was saying, so I agree with it for the greater part, but I have also seen and do know that prosecutors themselves, when they get certain files, they actually do recommend to the court that diversion be embarked upon. And I've seen many cases where the court has acquiesced to that, and also sometimes the court on its own motion, even without defense attorney moving that application, see the cases, especially where the offenses are particularly minor, and it's the first brush with the law and so on, that the courts will of their own volition move towards diversion as well. So I just wanted to include that based on the observations that we have from our practice. In relation to the other question you raised, Jodianne, we looked at some statistics and we saw that yes, diversion is in fact being used to some extent for children in conflict, but it is also being used for children who are deemed uncontrollable. I suppose the good work that the child diversion officers do with the counseling support, the attaching to mentorship and so on, word has spread, it seems. And so we're using the system for a cohort of children that it was not originally
meant to deal with.
Yes.
Well, it's certainly something that that children who are uncontrollable, that right there is a whole rabbit hole for people who are listening, who've heard that word, who've heard you speak about it, who've heard Jamaicans for Justice and Mikhail Jackson speak about it, and this particular cohort of children who need protection. It's certainly something that let's follow up on that so that we can have more of these conversations.